introduction. I'll just introduce myself. I'm Phil Sadler. I head the Science Education Department here. I've been here since interesting career so far, and my main contribution has been to bring some really excellent education researchers and staff into the Science Education Department to do very interesting and useful projects for STEM education nationally. This is a talk about research that's been going on in the department for the last decade. Some of you have seen some of it before. For some of you, it will be entirely new. My reason for wanting to do this is we were just funded by the NSF for a new project to investigate the role of out-of-school time experiences on young people's career interests, STEM career interests. So lots of, like most things in education, people have very strongly held opinions based on their own experience, and yet there's often very little data that crosses the country and communities that can be used as evidence. So people are using as evidence their own personal experience. So for those of you who know some statistics, when n equals 1, the error bars are pretty big. So the abstract, which I put in the announcement, looks like this. You might have read it. I'm going to talk about two big nationwide studies of 22,000 students total, and some of the things we learned from it. And then I'd like to morph the talk into where we should go with our new project as well. So most of you I know, but I don't know everybody here. So who's from the Science Education Department here? Okay. Any graduate students here? Postdocs? Postdocs, okay. Faculty? Scientists? Okay. Troublemakers? Okay. Okay. So I'm going to turn down make this a little more, is this all right? Or is that too dark? Let's see. There we go. I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal experiences in getting involved in STEM. And we all have these stories, and I want to share some of them, for some of us to share some of them as well. So I started off in a home where I was the son of a mechanical engineer. So my dad was an airplane designer during World War II. He worked on the P-40 series of fighter planes, and so our house was forever decorated with all kinds of planes. After the war, he went into the wire business. So we had these huge wire factories that I would love to visit and see all this machinery that he had designed for making different kinds of wire. And I had this sort of typical 50s, 60s experience with my own chemistry set and building rockets and making all kinds of things that were approved by my dad. He thought this was a good thing, a good way for me to be spending my time. When I got to college, I did a lot of, this led to some very interesting things. I started working with Seymour Papert on the development of the Logo computer language. I did all kinds of computer simulations, including with Allard Tumri on collision of galaxies. I worked on my first textbook project, writing an introductory calculus textbook for the college level, and did all kinds of optics and other projects. And then when I got out, I taught school. These are some of my students down here. I taught middle school, and this is them working with me on building a portable planetarium, which became the Star Lab, which is the largest selling planetarium in the world, including patents and other things. So my background, I was encouraged from a very early age to pursue a STEM field, engineering or science. So now I want to turn the lights back on for a second. And I wanted to ask about your stories, about what were the significant experiences, either in school or out of school, before you got to college, that convinced you you wanted to be in a STEM field. And I want to take some notes on this as well, so I'm going to actually take them here. So let me see if I can get this in order. Okay. So does anybody have something they would like to share with the group about their pre-college experiences? Yes, Sue.
Watching Jacques Cousteau.
Watching?
Jacques Cousteau.
Oh, Jacques Cousteau on TV. So watching what you would call that science TV or science TV shows.
But specifically.
Specifically Jacques Cousteau.
She didn't say anything about science. She just mentioned someone's name.
Rewiring a house with my dad.
Rewiring a house. Okay. Which probably still comes in handy, right? Yes.
So I had a similar experience as yours. My dad is a mechanical engineer, and whenever he was doing something, it was, come here, I want to show you how this works. And if he was changing the oil in the car, come here, you're going to need to know how to do this. And always encouraged us in trying to, exposing us to, here's how something works, here's why we do this, here's why it's necessary, and encouraging us to tinker.
So you would say you were working on projects with him, or him specifically teaching you certain things?
Both. It would more from him teaching us certain things and then working on projects, whether it was for scouts or for school or a science competition.
We're just home fix-it stuff.
Right.
Let me get some more.
Physics and math were easy for me.
In school?
Yes.
So it's the path of least resistance, you're saying, right?
Visiting science museums when I was in elementary and middle school, we sort of treated them like playgrounds. We had a really great hands-on kind of exploratory museum near us.
So this was, I missed the first part of it.
Science museums.
Oh, science museum. Well, that's okay.
So like with
That makes sense. You're going to end up in a science museum
With
soon.
families.
With family.
Sort of a weekend activity. My mom would take my brother and I.
Yeah. Yeah, like you've been to the Science Museum in Boston, I assume.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, I sat with Brad Washburn, who was the first director of the Science Museum at some event,
Yeah.
and I turned to him and I said, "So, what was different than what you expected when you started this museum?" He said, "The board of directors said I wouldn't have to do any fundraising." Yeah, Mary?
So I didn't have any family science influence, didn't get any science in school until high school.
Mm-hmm.
But we had the Time Life series of books in our house, which was the internet of the day. And I read every one of them. And they had projects in them, and I was interested in the stuff in those books.
A lot of stuff in this.
So that's like, so it's definitely out of school.
Yeah, this huge amount of information. I read through the World Book Encyclopedia. My bookmark went from the alphabet to Zworykin, who invented the television camera. So, in about 10 years. So yes.
I can't trace any particular STEM influence, but I think the fact that everything was presented as an option. That being exposed to a wide breadth of things made any of it possible, art and science, and that had to do with the quality of the school system I was in and the out-of-school STEM experiences, but just being exposed to a range of experiences from STEM to art to...
This was in school, though?
And outside. There was no push in a particular direction. Everything was presented as a viable option.
Yeah, Kim?
Well, there was Sputnik, the space race, Echo. We used to watch these things pass over. My father used to race cars. He liked to do mechanics. When I was in the 8th grade, my homeroom teacher was the typing teacher, so I used to repair the typewriters. I was good at math, and so, and I went to a kind of engineering high school.
Did you win any races?
He did, yeah.
What type of cars?
It's little sports cars. He'd do rally races.
No. Okay. How about some people I don't know here? Some postdocs and others who I'm not familiar with.
I think I'm a bit of an outlier on this, but I think role models are very important. I didn't have any, and it took me 4 years after school going through different careers because it's a traditional family, so I went to engineering and actuary. I like math. And it was really tough to take the decision to become a scientist, especially being a woman.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it didn't happen to me, but it made me lose a lot of time.
So this is a hypothesis.
Yeah, I mean,
that
I think
role
it
models.
would have helped not to be worried about women's
But you
science.
ended up without having.
Well,
a role
I
model.
started to read books, you know, Stephen Hawking and stuff, and then I went into science, but it was a very weird thing in my family. Yeah, I think sometimes it's something you have inside and you'll end up doing, but role models for women and minorities, I think, would help a lot.
Others.
I took apart everything in the house. Fans, radios, TVs, bicycles. Usually.
Yeah,
Sometimes. Fascination with taking it apart.
Yeah, I used to call this dissection in my middle school classroom. There were always things on tables and screwdrivers and other things to take them apart to see what was inside of them. So, with no emphasis on putting them back together again.
I can tell you one thing that allowed me to go into science is that university is free in Argentina. So after 4 years of studying something else, I only was able to do that because of free
So
university.
you were get interested later.
Right, but I wouldn't have done it if I had debt.
Yeah, right.
So I'm going to channel Emilio Falco, who used to be here, because I once asked him this question, how did you get interested in it? And he said he grew up on a farm in Uruguay, and at night, because there was nothing really to do, he'd lie down in the fields and he'd look up at the stars, and he said after you do that for a while, you get really interested. So access to nature would be...
This is without any instruments, just...
You're right.
Yeah.
Just add, I have many of these things in common, but to add something different that's not up there, I became fascinated by things I saw personally in nature. Like in September 1960, Hurricane Donna passed through here in eastern Mass, in the eye. And I was intrigued, I was only 9 years old, by a storm that got worse and worse and worse, then stopped, time out, clear skies, calm winds. And then it started all over again for like another 6 hours. And there are other things like that. We took a camping trip to Colorado a couple of years later. I grew up here, gray, weathered rock. Out there, bright red sandstones. Like, how can rock be that color? So I'd have these experiences like, that's weird. Why is it like that? And I got encouragement, especially from my dad. Well, let's go find out. And we had 3 sets of encyclopedias. We'd go out fishing, mostly just to take walks and along the way. So a lot of these things were things I observed, including looking up at the sky at night, experienced the eye of a hurricane, bizarre to me geology that made me curious, and I was encouraged, well, let's go find out. Even though my dad, he was a technical writer, had been trained as a sonar operator by the Navy in World War II, but he was curious too, like shared my enthusiasm. And we had a whole bookcase. We always, whatever house we were in was a bookcase with 3 sets of encyclopedia, 5 dictionaries, National Geographic magazines, all of that. It was way before anything was on TV.
Yeah, I know you read the dictionaries.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a whole separate... No, in dictionaries and encyclopedias, I'm the person who, during a cold February vacation, would sit down in the hallway where the bookcases were, and something would stir my curiosity. I'd start on, looking up cumulus clouds in the encyclopedia. And everything, of course, in the dictionary encyclopedia has see also. I could spend an entire day going through the concatenation of see alsos. So I don't know, at some point I had finished reading all 3 sets of encyclopedias and all 5
But following the early hyperlinks, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Way pre-internet.
Okay. Well, these are. I think these are great. These are some. Let's make these a little bit bolder and a little bit bigger. These are some of the many things that people say, and on occasion, people do research where they try to find out if these things, if aspects of this have some significant impact, and how big the impact is, comparative impact to other things. So I'm going to show you now. Let's see if I can get back into the slideshow. Let's see. Some of these things cost money or time or opportunity cost, and there are proponents for doing these, for increasing support or resources for things like advanced high school coursework, both in high school and access to introductory college level courses for high school students. There's some people think that it's the labs and demonstrations that attract students to STEM. Some people are for better assessment, improved instructional practices or pedagogy on the part of science and math teachers. Some of the other things that we're interested in are classroom visits by college faculty or students, student visits to colleges to see various kinds of things, the issue of role models, whether you're teachers or other people who are in STEM fields look like you or you can identify with, clubs and competitions, and improved guidance in trying to guide people towards careers that they might be interested in or good at. So one of the interesting pieces of research was done by a colleague of ours, Robert Tye, who was my doctoral student now at University of Virginia, and he looked at he interviewed scientists to find when they first became interested in science. And so he looked at these different levels, and I think we have people in the room who are represented at all of these different levels. And he found that the largest group were people who were interested in primary school or elementary school. And this was sort of exponentially declining. So by the end of the first year of college, or the start of college, almost 90% of the people that he interviewed were already interested in a STEM field. So this would argue for, if you want to increase the number of scientists and engineers and mathematicians, that you might do it before college. It's not necessarily going to happen. While there might be 10% of people who get interested during or after college, that's a small number. But as far as the disciplines that people were interested in, which discipline they became interested in, this mainly happened in the high school years, where they discovered they liked and were good at math or physics or biology or chemistry or engineering. And when they were younger, they were more generalists. But some people became interested at the start of college. So kids seem to get interested in a STEM career early on, and then they sort of refine what they want to do when they're in high school. Now, the kind of research that we typically do here around persistence are called retrospective cohort studies. And these came out of the epidemiological world, where we survey students early in college, usually in the first couple of weeks in a mandatory college course. So most American colleges and universities have a mandatory English class that students have to take as freshmen, and we survey students as in these classes, because in these classes are students who were going to be scientists or engineers or mathematicians, and there are a lot of people who are not. And we survey them as to what they did in high school, what out-of-school experiences they had, what classes they took, what the grades were that they got in these classes, and also what they wanted to be at the beginning of high school, the end of high school, the very start of college, and so on. So we have a pseudo-longitudinal study where we look back in an individual's experience. We typically use a stratified random sample, so here's one of the studies where we had, 100 colleges and universities. I forget what the colors mean. I'm colorblind anyway, so I couldn't tell you which ones they are. But I know there are 2-year schools, 4-year colleges, and universities of different sizes. So we typically try to randomly sample colleges and universities. Sometimes we look at specific groups of colleges and universities. And the two studies I'm going to talk about are, which I'll mention by name, something called PRIZE, Persistence Research in Science and Engineering, and OPSI, Outreach Programs and Science Career Intentions. So this was mainly looking at what happens in school, and we had a few questions about what happens outside of school. This had more questions about outside of school. And the new study is primarily outside of school. So anyway, this was about 6,000 students. This was about 16,000 students in the study. Oh, and here's the sample, looks like this. This was a stratified random sample. This was a sample of colleges that got funding from NSF's Science Talent Expansion Program. And so somewhat of a balance in gender and a wide range of race and ethnicity. Most of them are college freshmen in both cases. Some fraction, a quarter of them want STEM careers. And the instrument was typically 7 pages, took a half an hour to fill out. So here's some of the results from this. How does interest in a STEM career change in high school? Does it change at all? Is it different by field? Are there differences by gender? A lot of people have seen this particular graph that I'll show. This has been written up in several articles, but a lot of people have seen the graphic that we produced. But this is the actual question. So it starts off, did you want to be a medical professional in middle school, beginning of high school, end of high school, beginning of first semester of college? With lots of scientist-type things, biology, astronomer, chemist, different kinds of engineer, so on. And then the things we're less interested in social scientist, business, lawyer, English language, etc. down here. So we're able to track if a person wanted to be an engineer in middle school, wanted to be a chemist at the beginning of high school, and then wanted to be a lawyer at the end of high school. We can we can see how their interests changed. And this is the graphic of how these changes took place in 5 different major categories. So the top 2 are considered STEM, but engineering was so big we wanted to have it as a separate category. So engineering, all the rest of STEM, medicine, which is not considered STEM, STEM-related, health, and then other fields. And so this is the beginning of high school, and this is the end of high school. So you can see the paths represent people who change or are the same. If they're horizontal, they stay in the same grouping, and if they're curved, then they've moved to something new, something different. And let's see if I can get, I do have a pointer, okay. So you can see, for instance, there's a lot of males at the beginning of high school want to be engineers, even though they've never taken an engineering course. Maybe they know somebody's an engineer, maybe they think they're going to drive a train. I'm not sure. Oh, and here's the females as well. But you can see very few students move from, say, 9th grade wanting to be an engineer to wanting to be a scientist at the end of high school. Many more move starting off wanting to be in science and are attracted to engineering. Also, lots of males want to be physicians or veterinarians or pharmacists that they need a graduate degree for in medicine, but lots of them shift to health fields to be a therapist or a technician or a nurse. And we see similar things with female students where a large group moves from wanting to be a physician in medicine to wanting to be in the health field. And we see big shifts in women wanting to go into STEM, with a large fraction of them moving into some other field. And very little transfer between STEM, between science and math, into engineering. And of course, the engineering is a very small group, although it does grow during high school. So, when you look at these complicated things, you can simplify them by removing all the less than 1% paths, and you get something that looks much simpler. So, and you can see, for instance, the increase in engineering that takes place among females are females who started off not wanting to be in STEM, and by the end of high school were attracted into engineering. So because there's so much shifting, this means that there may be, it's possible to study influences. So we can test to see whether certain kinds of experiences may make a difference. Let's just move on. So how do specific careers form? We asked them what they wanted to be in 9th grade, and this is what they said they wanted to be in 9th grade. And this is the percentage who were still in STEM at the end of high school. So you can see that, somebody who says, I want to be a lawyer in 9th grade, there's a 30% chance they might be interested in a STEM career by the end of high school, so they do get influence. But the biggest one here on the right is physics. So if they knew what physics was, or at least was able to say physics in 9th grade, they had an 86% chance of still being interested in STEM. And you can see the one that's sort of in the middle is Earth Environmental Science here. And that's for the males. For the females, it looks very similar, except the graph is lower. There are fewer females interested in STEM fields. Astronomer is interesting because it's significantly different from the moon here. So if somebody said they wanted to be an astronomer in 9th grade, they're less likely than other sciences to still want to be in STEM. And we had a senior do her senior thesis on this and produce some really interesting graphs. So this is looking particularly at an astronomy career. Looking at an astronomy career, but this is looking at all the careers. So this is, the top one is, for males is engineering there. And you can see that engineering, this is middle school, beginning of high school, end of high school, start of college. It's sort of the biggest fraction. And here it is for females. It's still reasonable. If you graph this on a logarithmic scale, you see the proportional decline, and you can see that the slope of the astronomy interest is the steepest negative slope of all of these things. So interest in becoming an astronomer decreases faster than any of these other fields. However, there are lots of these students who are interested in astronomy and then change into some other STEM field. And these are a few other graphs relating to that, which this one is particularly interesting. So this is beginning high school interest for people who say they want to be an astronomer for males and for females to actually be in astronomy at the end of high school. They have about a 20% chance. So people want different things from their careers. This is the second question that we asked on this survey, which has to do with these factors that are sort of accepted as important concerning career satisfaction. So, making money, for instance. There are some people who like to make, who's driven to make money. I think we know some who have been in the news recently. Becoming famous, and then things like helping other people or working with other people. When we tallied all this for students, we found that we were able to group most of these, some of these characteristics into these two groups, into people issues that track together, working with other people, helping other people, and extrinsic rewards like compensation, fame, and status. And these are two different factors which can be graphed against each other, and you can see how these interests spread out and compare STEM with other fields. So for males, there's some difference in the desire for external rewards, with science being the lowest, science and math being the lowest in terms of fame and status and compensation, but not significantly different from many of these. However, there's a big range in the importance of other people. So engineers say working with others and helping others is less important to them than, say, males who are interested in health or medicine. And for females, the graph looks similar, but it's in the bottom two quadrants, meaning that on average, female students are less interested in these external rewards and more interested in these other people issues. To me, this means that in high school, when STEM careers are being sold or explained, the idea of making money or getting status or winning the Nobel Prize or people knowing who you are is much more appealing to the boys than it is to the girls. Whereas to the girls in high school, the importance of having your work make a difference in the world and working on teams with other interesting people is much more important, and that should be emphasized in high school discussions of career. In addition, this was a study, this was an analysis that looked at clubs, amongst other things, clubs and competitions, which turned out to be significant. These are odds ratios. Students had 1.5 times the odds of wanting a STEM career if they were involved in these kinds of clubs or competitions, or certainly an increase if they if they read or read books on science or watched TV about science. And we went deeper into this with our second study, where we actually measured the kinds of competitions and clubs and the impact. And here's the results from one of our colleagues, Kelly Miller, who looked at different kinds of competitions. This one was engineering competitions, and she found that students controlling for prior interest and background factors, that students who were involved in engineering competitions were about 6% more likely to want to go into engineering as a result of that involvement. And for science fairs, she found something similar. Kids who were involved in science fairs were about 8% more likely to want to go into science, controlling for their previous interest. So these were, on average, beneficial for students, and the science fairs affected students who wanted to go into science, but robotic competitions and things and other things, or IT, did not. And in this case, engineering and robotic competitions impacted kids' interest in engineering, but science fairs did not. So it's very career specific. Zoe Bergstrom found that for kids, for a probability of wanting an astronomy career, that that males were more interested than females, but if the kids had observed stars, either naked eye or with a telescope, the percentages were about the same. So her conclusion was there should be much more opportunity, especially for girls, to use telescopes and observe stars. And once kids get to college, females graduate at higher rates in STEM disciplines than males. So they have a better chance of getting through the major once they get to college with an interest. So now, coursework. Some people mentioned high school coursework. Does coursework make a difference? And we've done several studies on advanced placement, and this is an analysis on a change in probability or difference in probability as a result of taking different kinds of biology. So this is, if they took no biology, they were more likely to want to go into the scientific field than if they took one course or two courses. It's surprising. I haven't interviewed any of these kids. I would like to know why. But we were interested in the number of years of taking a course versus taking an AP course, because the general knowledge is that AP increases students' interest. But what we found was when you put both of the variables in the model, it's the second year which appears to make the difference, and not whether they took an AP course or a non-AP course or took the AP exams. So it looks like taking a second year, an advanced course in a field may make some difference in some cases. Here for chemistry, for instance, somebody who took a second year of chemistry was about 11% more likely to want to go into a STEM field. And this is after controlling for their previous interest. In physics, we see the same kind of effect with an increase in probability of wanting to go into a STEM field, and no effect from the AP when the second year is in the model. And finally, calculus also makes a difference. The more math, the better. And again, no influence of the AP curriculum. So, and this just sums it up. We'll skip ahead. One of the students we had last year here, one of the graduate students from the ed school, Tamer Said, had this really interesting idea, because he was from Egypt, and he said the pedagogy used in Egyptian science classrooms was pretty dead, and that it wasn't very exciting. Even though he got interested in engineering, he said most people don't. It seemed really boring. So he wondered if pedagogy had an influence. And luckily, we had asked students about all these kinds of things that happened in their high school classroom. Like whether they got to ask questions, they got to answer questions, whether the teacher connected the science to everyday life, the small group work, and so on. So all these different questions in biology, chemistry, and physics. And the way the way you analyze this kind of data is you do a factor analysis to see if any of these things group together. And then you can use the groupings, the factors, in your statistical models. So we found that they did indeed group together. And so this is the first variable, and this is what a factor analysis looks like. All these in this, is that red color?
Yes.
Red? So the red, they're all big numbers, and the other ones are all small numbers. That means that these all sort of are correlated and go together. So this was what we call the engaging classroom, where students answered questions, the teacher connected things to everyday life, kids got to ask questions, teacher connected what they learned to other disciplines, they worked in small groups. So this was an engaging, sort of active classroom. And we found that these factors were the same across the 3 different courses we studied in high school. So this is like one kind of pedagogy that's going on, or one pedagogical factor. The second one we call the ambitious pedagogy. So this was what science teachers who are very ambitious about their teaching tend to do. They put a lot of extra time into things like field trips and bringing in guest speakers and having videos, students working with each other, giving students lots of feedback on their assignments. And here, again, all this red means, and all the small numbers outside means that these things stick together. The third variable was this humanistic or sociological pedagogy, talking about the work of female scientists, having guest female scientists in particular, talking about the benefits of being a scientist, and the problems about being a scientist, including ethics and the various stages, how long it takes, and underrepresentation of certain groups. And again, this all loaded in the same way. So this is a fourth factor, and then the third factor. The fourth factor we found was the assessment factor, where people talked about the different kinds of assessment and the things that were on assessments. And these all loaded together. So what this means is that teachers don't just do one of these things. They might have a different value for each of these things. So you might have a classroom where there's lots of engagement, lots of ambitious pedagogy, very little of this and very little of this. So this by itself is really interesting, that you can break down like all of the things that happen in a science classroom into these sort of 4 types of teaching from all of those different questions. Not all of them fit, but this is a good number of them fit. The next step is to see if you calculate this for every student for every course to see whether any of these make a difference in their interest in STEM. So what do people think who haven't seen this? Has anybody seen this? Well, let's see. Phil has seen this. The posse group has seen this, but nobody else has seen this. Anybody venture to guess what the most impactful pedagogy is for high school students?
Engaging.
Engagement?
Yeah.
Ambitious.
Ambitions? Anybody else? Anybody else with a hypothesis that we can test?
Engaging than humanistic.
Say that a little.
Engaging than humanistic.
Engaging than humanistic. Well, we were measuring whether the kids changed in their interests, like they got more interested or less interested in STEM as a result of having teachers using these pedagogies. But we also asked them how good their teacher was. And so we built a model where we looked at which of these things predict whether a student think a teacher is a good teacher. And there might be something different than whether they get more or less interested in STEM. And these are the results here. So I put them all on one graph, so it makes things a little bit easier. Okay. So this is change in STEM career interest on the vertical scale. There was only one factor that had a significant impact on student career interest, and that was the humanistic or the sociological aspect. This thing appeared to increase student interest significantly. These aren't big changes, it's just a couple of percent, but these are across, thousands of kids. So why would the humanistic pedagogy make a bigger difference than these other things?
It makes it concrete.
What's that?
It makes it concrete.
Make it concrete what it is to have that career? Yeah. Could be.
People are hurting animals.
People are hurting animals.
Well, also, if you're already interested, and then it may not make much, then probably, it could be that as far as bringing new people in, people that are not already sort of nerdy, that's where then you would want the...
Yeah, you can actually statistically test for that by doing what's called an interaction to see whether it affects the uninterested or the interested ones differently. In other words, does it attract more of the uninterested ones or does it keep the interested ones? And so I think there was no interaction. I don't remember now. I'd have to look it up. I think there was no interaction, so it sort of affected both groups the same. But that's an interesting possibility. And then the other variable was overall student rating of teacher quality, and that students liked the engaging teacher. They thought the engaging teacher was a really good teacher, even though it didn't have the effect on their career interest, which is, otherwise that stuff would be lined up sort of on a diagram if they were correlated. They appear to be uncorrelated. Yes, question?
So do people follow their aptitudes or they follow encouragement? I mean, if you're good, if you find early on in life, by the 5th grade, that you're good in math and science, you would have a tendency to follow that path.
Well, we actually wrote a paper about that in math. So about whether those kinds of things, which comes first, the chicken or the egg. Right. It looks like you have to have an aptitude. You have to have some. What do we call it? You have to have some ability in the field to do well, but you need encouragement as well. And I remember when I was a teacher, I didn't think that my role was really to encourage students directly to pursue certain careers or to recognize them necessarily other than giving them grades. But that appears to make a big difference, recognizing students so they know that they're good at something.
Well, because there's discouragement all the time, so at least if you just to counteract that.
So this is interesting. And finally, we have some data from Phil Rosenfield, and I redid some of his analysis because I love when people are working on this. I'd like to go through the data set myself. And what Phil was looking at was he was looking at gender role models. So does having a female teacher for female students make a difference compared to having a male teacher? So what he looked at was that these are sort of, I grouped them into the percentage of high school science teachers who are male. So this is by the students in the study. So that means the largest group has about half and half female and male teachers. There are some students with no male teachers and some students with 100% male teachers, with all male teachers. So there is a bit of a normal distribution here. And the question is, are female high school students influenced by the gender of their teacher, or are male high school students influenced. And the way this is done is with a logistic regression. I don't have a pretty graphic for this, but I have the logistic regression here. And this shows the model, the variables are in the model, and the real test is the interaction. Does teacher gender by student gender, that sort of 4x4 matrix, make a difference? And what we found was that whether you're interested in STEM at the beginning of high school made a difference, significant difference. Your father's career made a difference, but not your mother's career. How good you were at math made a difference. Whether you were male, more males were interested in STEM careers than females. The number of science courses that you took makes a difference. The fraction of male teachers that you had does not make a difference overall, whether you're male or female. And the interaction, whether the teacher is the same gender as you, the number of teachers you had who were the same gender as you makes no difference. So we didn't see any evidence of a role model effect looking at the issue in this way. We expected if there was, we would see that girls who had female teachers in high school were more likely to go into STEM, and boys who had more male teachers would be more likely to go into STEM. But we didn't see any interaction.
But wouldn't a role model be someone in STEM and not only a teacher?
Well, we had information about their high school teachers, so we thought that they would, for most kids, they would all have contact with science teachers who were in STEM. I mean, science teachers. A teacher would represent someone in STEM.
Right, but a small fraction that is usually less affected by gender, right?
Mm-hmm. But we controlled for the parents' career because we thought that would have a big effect if your dad or your mom was in STEM. But it only appeared to help to affect if your dad was. Was there a question out there? Yeah, question?
Just repeating what Cecilia said about the role model doesn't have to be the teacher. And again, in US, I think there's this perception that teaching is not a good job. So probably that affects how you perceive a teacher. Like, is it worth being a role model? Like,
yeah, except there's a huge discussion in the education community about having teachers who look like you. Teachers that there should be, you should have teachers who reflect the composition of the community. They should reflect the student. And so we weren't looking in general at all role models. We were looking at this particular one. Could we find evidence for an effect of balancing or moving in the direction of having more female teachers because that would help female students? We wanted to see, was there some evidence? We didn't find any evidence. Now, we could certainly look at what you're saying about whether they're exposed to scientists or engineers or mathematicians as role models. Most kids are not when they're in high school.
Yeah, I think it's a different issue, right? You're never discouraged to become a teacher when you're a woman. You're discouraged to become a scientist or an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, most people are very surprised by this anyway. So these are some of the findings that we have here about persistence, that STEM interest shifts in high school, and the engineering group is larger than the science and math group for males. There's a lot of volatility for females, with a lot leaving STEM fields or engineering in high school. Then the stuff about additional high school coursework makes a difference in some fields. This difference in people orientation and extrinsic reward. This investigation of science reading and watching clubs and competitions, which we're going to get far more into in the next study. That this sociological aspect of pedagogy seemed to be important, this humanistic pedagogy, and we found no role model of that. Now, the next, so any questions about the findings, and I'll just touch on where we're going from here. Yeah, Tim?
Well, you said that aptitude and encouragement were strong factors. I assume that these other factors are then possibly less important, or they allow people with aptitude and encouragement to persist in their attempts to get into STEM careers.
Yeah, I think these things are all related. To me, I mean, the question you're asking is, like, what's the magnitude of these effects?
Right.
And you can often get to them, like in this model, you can actually look at the magnitude of the standardized test math score, comparing it. I don't have the magnitudes up here, comparing it to these other variables. So you can actually get a estimate of the relative magnitude of these effects.
I mean, should students be sorted by aptitude early in life and then be directed into careers that are appropriate for their aptitudes?
Well, that's more of a European model than an American model. So, yeah, there's a lot of discussion about that. I don't really have a view on that. No.
But you think that they self-sort to some extent?
Yeah. So anyway, so the last thing I want to mention, this new project, Female Representation in Out-of-School Time Science for us, is going to look at these 4 major areas. This is the first time one study has looked at all 4 of these things. So this sort of structured, educator-supervised group activities, like after-school programs, camps, scouts, where there are adults involved, unstructured activities like job shadowing, volunteer jobs, environmental activism, family activities like watching, going to museums and such, watching science films or TV shows, and then student-initiated activities that are pursued without much adult involvement, including things like MOOCs, which kids take. So we want to look at these things, see what, develop a survey instrument, survey, select a big sample, survey students, and see the relative importance, whether any of these are significant and what the relative importance is. So much more sophisticated than we've done before. Yeah, Ken?
So are women de-encouraged to go into STEM fields? I mean, it seems extreme that these 2 plots you had of persistence of males versus females, but the aptitudes seem to be equivalent. But it seems as if there's some misdirection going on.
Yeah, in our culture, I think that there is some of that. Yes.
And possibly, and this may be stereotypical and maybe not be true, that women are more empathetic and seem to be sensitive to these social pressures, possibly than men are, possibly.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It does look like they're more, as far as what they want from their careers, they seem to be much more interested in helping people and working with other people than.
But that might be cultural too, right?
Yeah.
Yes. I'm sure.
And there's the stereotype of science that if you go into science, you don't get to work with people.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's not true. But that's not true. Generally, science is very much a team.
And if you talk about science with students, humanistics, say, here's the benefits of a career. One of those benefits might be you get to help the world, you get to make a difference, you get to work with people.
That makes a difference.
Right?
Yeah.
Then I mean, your humanity factor includes a little bit of countering what might be a stereotype about what science is like, or just making explicit, there's not many of you in science, so that makes a student more likely to say, well, but I can do this,
Yeah, and there wasn't, when we tested for an interaction with gender, it wasn't there, which means
Oh, but
that
there's-
kind of sociological
Right.
pedagogy
beneficial to-
is beneficial for
yeah.
everybody. Yeah.
But it seems like the biggest benefit you to get is by encouraging the women to stay into the field, because the men stay in the field, but the women dive out for some reason, which I suspect is sociological, and you would retain more STEM people by focusing on retaining the women, because the women seem to be leaving despite their aptitude and early interest.
Yeah,
Whereas-
so there are several studies and lots of opinion about that. What we're searching for is like what are some of the activities and mechanisms that
So
have
ways
some
of- so all
evidence
these
that actually
are
work.
potential ways of encouraging girls
Right.
to stay in science.
So with the humanistic part, can we go back to that one?
No.
Because it's the only one that you seem to find has an impact. But part of that is guest female scientists. And then you rule out role model based only on the teachers. And again, I think this is not a fair conclusion, because it might be that if you invite people that students perceive as role models, it makes a difference.
Yeah,
Not
that
just the
maybe. Yeah,
teachers.
well, Phil can speak to that more than I
I think
can.
that casting it as role models, casting these conclusions as role models is overly simplistic, and we're just trying to get a quick way of saying it. Really, what we're up against is an assumption that there's a problem with females leaving STEM in high school. And the thought is, well, that's because we don't have enough female science teachers. All we got to do is get more female science teachers, and then the answer is solved. But we can't do that. We can't find any more. So really, our hands are tied. We can't improve anything. And really, the way it should be looked at is pedagogy can change. Anyone can teach science and increase interest in whether it's humanistic, whether it's showing that this is a great job for you to have, or so on. And that's the way to go. Calling it, even there have even been studies that peers are good role models for females, and at least in the college level, that they're finding role models there. So to take this data set and then try to look at role models within it, it would be really complex. Really, we're just trying to say that if your only solution for increasing female persistence in STEM is increasing the number of female teachers, that's not going to work. And that's really what this is.
Do female teachers teach differently than male teachers?
That's a good question, and that's come up around these kinds of things, and I haven't gotten that far into it. I've run some tests, but not the full battery. So it would be interesting to see if female teachers, or in the teachers in different disciplines, use these, are different on these four pedagogy factors. Yeah.
I just want an anecdotal thing about my totally non-STEM daughter. But in high school, she had a woman geometry teacher, and who was also a cross coach. And it really influenced her attitude towards geometry. And partly she had some talent with it because she's a pretty good artist, but it was like the first math course that she took that she really liked. And it actually led her to take calculus the next year, 2 years later. So it was it did change her attitude.
Yeah, and so the question writ large is was it because of some teaching technique, or did the gender of the
Yeah, my impression from her was the gender mattered, because she had, in math, she had always done as well. And because of things the math teachers did, like can you teach two of the boys in the class and things like that happens still, even though
Okay, so if people are interested in any of these things, we're going to have meetings this fall to try to start thinking about how to build a survey and the kinds of questions that should be on it for this next big study. If anybody wants to learn about how this kind of process works, we'd be happy to involve you. And then some of the results are on the Fix website here, which we maintain with some of our some interactives and a lot of papers. And this was sponsored. We get our money from several different places. And I didn't do this by myself. There are lots and lots of people involved with these various studies. So, and if you want to talk to me, P. Sadler will get you to my email. So anyway, these are some of the. So that is what I have today, and now we get to have lunch.
Bill,
Yeah.
your frost
So should
survey.
we, is it
Where are your subjects going to be in the frost? How are you going to cast separate?
Who are the subjects going to be? They're going to be
The
introductory college English students. It's going to be everybody from a randomly selected group of colleges and universities. Yeah.
You mentioned this sample of one, and you only studied the U.S. education system.
Yeah.
Have you looked into what's different in the Nordic system, for example, and what makes it?
No, because I mean we've talked about doing studies in other countries, but NSF likes funding stuff here, and so it's easier to get money to study here. The second thing is that in the United States we have this unbelievable transition between graduating from high school and going to college. There's this incredible mixing that goes on. So if you look at an introductory English class in college, kids are from all over the place, all these different high schools. And so, and they haven't usually been selected down in high school, where in a lot of European systems, you get into a polytechnic or you make some career decisions along the way. So I don't know if this particular methodology that we use would work as well in another country.
No, but your aim is basically to promote STEM career. Now, if that route works better, then you don't have to just study one system, right? The U.S. system.
Yeah.
But you had some of that data, don't you? Because there's international students that are taking these introductory
Yeah, there are
courses.
international students, and sometimes people get really interested in a particular group that we have because we have so many. Like we had a study that was done with homeschool kids in mathematics, which we usually exclude them because we don't know what to do with them. They didn't take any regular high school courses. We don't know exactly what to do. One of our colleagues came in and said, "Oh, you have 300 homeschool students who took calculus? This is the biggest data set in the country of homeschool kids taking introductory calculus." So occasionally we have that interest, and we have, probably 15, 20% of the data set are kids who went to school in other countries. So we haven't done a lot with that, though. I don't know exactly what they make of our requesting information about courses, which they may not have had. So, oh, we all set? Okay, let's feed now, and I brought in some stuff to.